Ever imagine you're winning your divorce, only to realize you just signed off on a $1.5 million debt bomb? My husband's lawyer leaned in and whispered 5 words that changed everything. Total liability. Negative 1.5 million. In an instant, Daniel's smug face went ghostly pale as the debt papers he'd just initialed. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead, even though the courtroom AC was cranked to 68 degrees. Just 5 words, but they were enough to dismantle an empire. His hands shook as he stared at the file he was so desperate to sign minutes ago, the one meant to kick me to the curb with nothing but a $50,000 pity check. But Daniel messed up. He never saw it coming. He thought I was just the low-level accountant he could talk down to. Spite the wife he could throw divorce papers at while sneering, "You're a total zero without me." The woman his mother treated like literal trash. He didn't realize I'd been ghostwriting this nightmare for 18 months to get this smile today. I had to live like a ghost for a year and a half. I stayed silent while he spent my blood, sweat, and tears on his mistress. I played the part of the broken wife while the whole world looked at me with pity. They thought I'd lost my mind. The truth. I was playing the longest game of my life. Because the real tragedy isn't being cheated on. It's realizing you're being set up as the fall guy for $1 million debt by the man you once loved. My name is Emily Hayes. Daniel was right about one thing. I am an expert with numbers. But he made a fatal mistake thinking I'd use them to beg for mercy, instead of using them to strike back. Don't look away. I'm about to show you exactly how a woman pushed to the edge turned a betrayal into $1 million takedown. This is the final lesson I have for Daniel, ... And it might just be the key to saving your own life. I'm 42. Up until recently, I'd been Mrs. Daniel Hayes for 2 decades. But before I was the wife, I was Emily, an accountant with a killer instinct for numbers. Daniel thought I'd forgotten my roots after years of playing the supportive partner in the background. In Pacific Heights, reputation is worth more than gold. At those weekend cocktail parties, Daniel would parade me around like a trophy. Meanwhile, I knew he was trashing our joint credit to mortgage our home for some delusional crypto play. I had to stand there smiling with a glass of champagne in my trembling hand, playing the happy wife just to keep a shred of dignity. All while I was secretly counting down the days until the bomb went off. 20 years. That's longer than most. Hollywood marriages longer than some small countries have existed. And definitely longer than my breaking point should have been. But I'm stubborn. I got that from my grandmother. Whenever the anger got too heavy, I'd twist the old silver ring she left me. It's worn down and worth nothing compared to the diamonds Daniel bought me to fix his mistakes. But it was the only thing keeping me grounded. She used to say a woman is most beautiful when she's standing tall in the middle of a storm. The night I found the forged contracts, I spent until dawn retching in the bathroom. My body was screaming at the betrayal, but my mind was sharpening the blade. I met Daniel when I was 20, trying to make a name for myself in Chicago. I'd finished college early not because I was some genius, but because I was desperate to be independent. I started out as a file clerk at a big-name law firm. It was a grind, modest pay and constant paper cuts, but it was mine. By 21, my obsession with the details got me promoted to finance. I learned to listen more than I talked, and I kept my eyes on every single red flag in the books. Daniel walked into my life at 28. He was this ambitious architect with big dreams of building a skyline in San Francisco. He talked about success like it was his birthright. He dreamed of the buildings. I promised to handle the legal and the money to make them real. A weird kind of romance, right? We got married the day I turned 2. Ryan was born 2 years later. Even while raising him, I kept my foot in the door with part-time accounting gigs. I started building my own EFU fund, tucking away every extra cent I earned. My grandma was my North Star. She used to tell me, a smart woman always has a back door. It's not about keeping secrets. It's about having your own back. By the time I hit 25, Mercer Construction was blowing up. Daniel practically begged me to quit the law firm and go Elin with him. He needed someone to manage the cash flow, handle the high-end clients, and wrangle the contractors, someone he could trust with his life. So I became the world's most overqualified, unpaid servant. I was the CFO, the office manager, the project coordinator, and even the interior designer for the model units. I handled the marketing and threw the launch parties. I did all that while raising Ryan and keeping the house running like a Swiss. Watch, my official title was wife. My unofficial title, literally everything else. For nearly 20 years, I poured my blood, sweat, and tears into Daniel's dream. And for 20 years, he's soaked up the spotlight. At every industry gala, I was just Daniel's wife. He'd thank his team, his mentors, and his own genius vision. But he never once remembered to thank me. Money and power did something to him. It made him blind. He started freezing me out of big company decisions, staying late at the office, every night. The insults started small critiques of my clothes, my parenting, until he finally hit me with the big one. I was stagnant and lacked ambition. Are you kidding me? I was running his entire logistics empire for free and raising his son. But sure, Daniel, I'm the one who isn't ambitious enough. Then, right on cue. 18 months after I discovered his debt transfer scheme and triggered my plan B, he dropped the bomb. It's played out exactly like I'd scripted it. Daniel, in all his arrogance, finally asked for a divorce. It was a random Tuesday. I was in the kitchen making steak his favorite because apparently I'm addicted to over-delivering for people who don't care. He told me to sit down, and his face, it was chilling. No guilt, no sadness, just a cold business transaction. I want out, he said. Then came the terms. I keep the real estate, the cars, and the company. You get Ryan. He listed it off like he was liquidating assets. I keep the value. You keep the responsibility. He treated our grown son like an old piece of furniture he was dropping off at a thrift store. I sat there, stunned. 20 years of marriage, and it ends at the kitchen table between the salt and the butter. Like I was just some outdated model he was tossing into the landfill. The next morning, he shoved a preliminary agreement in front of me and demanded I sign it right then and there. It completely wiped out my 2 decades of work at Mercer. You should be thanking me for the 50 grand, he sneered. For a low-level accountant like you, that's 10 years of salary if you didn't have me. What I didn't know then, what I only realized later, was that Daniel had been plotting this for months. He had a shark for a lawyer, Harold Whitfield, an expensive old fox who'd built him a safe exit while I was still busy managing Daniel's life and health. It was a total betrayal from the man I'd spent my entire youth building up. Then came my mother-in-law, Margaret. She showed up draped in pity like it was a designer scarf. This woman hadn't valued a single thing I'd done in 20 years, but now she was comforting me with a full face of makeup. She told me it was my fault for not knowing how to keep my man. Men always crave something new, dear, she said, so high and mighty. Rich, coming from a woman whose husband would rather spend all day at the golf club than look at her. But of course, I was the problem. That first week was a blur of tears. Daniel moved me into the guest room. He had the papers drawn up, the payments scheduled, the timeline set. It moved so fast, I felt like I was being held underwater. Everyone saw a grieving wife, a victim who got blindsided after 20 years of devotion. But here's the thing. Daniel had no clue that 18 months ago, I'd accidentally stumbled upon a horrific truth buried deep inside his secret financial reports. It all started with a credit card bill. I stumbled upon a $25,000 luxury watch. Curiosity got the best of me. I started digging through statements, bank reports, and loan contracts Daniel had tucked away. I recorded every paper, every digit into a small notebook. I tallied the bank loans, contractor debts, back taxes, and failed investments masked as strategic risks not to mention the lavish expenses for a life I never knew existed. The final number hit me like a freight train, over $2.2 million in debt. Meanwhile, our actual assets, the house, the company, the cars after mortgages were worth maybe $700,000 tops. We weren't rich. We were underwater by $1.5 million. I suddenly flashed back to a few months earlier when I'd cautiously suggested, don't you think we're spreading ourselves too thin? These numbers look tight. He just looked at me with a mix of pity and amusement, then laughed. Emily, you never change. You see the trees but miss the forest. Always worrying about petty cash like a low-level accountant. Let the big minds handle the big business. Once the downtown high-rise hits its milestones, these little debts will vanish. I've got this under control. Looking at the numbers now, it clicked. He wasn't some criminal mastermind. It was just so blindingly arrogant, so obsessed with the mirage of the future that he ignored every red flag, including me. To him, every expense was just pocket change. But they'd piled up into a massive tidal wave, and he had no idea he was standing right in its path. My hands shook as I held that notebook, but it wasn't fear. It was a cold, icy rage. A thought sparked. He's digging his own grave with his arrogance. And I, the low-level accountant he looked down on, would be the one to shine a light on that hole at just the right moments using the very pocket change he ignored. But I wouldn't strike yet. I'd wait until he walked right into his own trap. My first move? Get our son on board without raising a single red flag. The paper trail he thought he'd erased was still there, waiting for me to bring it in too. The light. From that moment on, I started my patient game of payback. Less than a week after the divorce announcement, Daniel had total control. The living room became my official residence in my own home. My closet was shrunk from a walk-in. Two tiny shelves he generously let me keep. The message was loud and clear: this isn't your house anymore. 2 weeks later, he moved his mistress in. Sophia Reed, 29, his subordinate. A young girl with a glam social media life who spent more on luxury gym clothes than a family's monthly budget. She took over my space like she'd always lived there. She even used my grandmother's heirloom apron to make trendy drinks. Sophia even tried to toss my grandma's wooden recipe box. This ugly box doesn't fit the vibe of the new minimalist kitchen, she said. I had to quietly ask for it back, watching Daniel just shrug. I hugged that box, the only piece of my past left, and promised myself I would never forgive him. Sophia was younger than the years I'd spent as Daniel's wife, but she had the audacity to strut around the home I'd built. Daniel paraded her around like a new trophy, both of them lounging on the furniture I'd picked out with love. He'd throw his arm around her right in front of me, treating me like a piece of invisible furniture. The humiliation escalated by the hour. First, he unilaterally froze my personal credit cards. We need financial boundaries, he said, using that fake professional tone. Then the joint card. Then he suggested I find a new place to stay while the paperwork finalized. My home of 20 years. And I was being evicted like a stranger. 20-4 hours after I refused to sign that ridiculous preliminary agreement. Daniel changed all the codes to the garage and the security system. I came home late that night after meeting my lawyer, Nina, and stood shivering in the San Francisco cold for nearly an hour. When Daniel finally opened the door, he looked at me with total indifference. "Oh, sorry," he said, not a hint of remorse in his voice. "I forgot you were still here. My mother-in-law, Margaret, was all too eager to help me pack." But help really meant her digging through my life, playing judge and jury over what I was worthy of taking with me. Old clothes? Fine. A few family photos. Sure. But when she reached for my grandmother's wooden recipe box, she paused, a greedy glint in her eyes like she was considering keeping it for herself. The things I was strictly forbidden to touch: any piece of jewelry Daniel had given me over the last 2 decades. Any piece of furniture I had personally picked out. anything with even a hint of resale value. This is marital property, Margaret explained with a face like ice, and Daniel has legal ownership. She stuffed my clothes into black trash bags, not moving boxes trash bags. Like I was a pile of waste being hauled out to the curb. But if you believe that no one has the right to toss your worth into a trash bag, hit that subscribe button right now. Your support isn't just a sub. It's a statement that we're going to reclaim our voice and our dignity from the ashes together. Thank you for not letting me fight this battle alone during that entire humiliating stretch. I had exactly one person I thought I could trust, Laura Bennett. We'd been best friends since high school, 25 years of riding the highs and lows from teenage heartbreaks to weddings and babies. She was my first call after Daniel demanded the divorce. Laura was pure empathy, always checking. In letting me cry on her shoulder over glasses of wine, she'd call Daniel a scumbag and tell me I deserved so much better. But slowly, things felt ... off. Tiny glitches in the matrix started appearing. Daniel seemed to know my every move before I even made it. I'd tell Laura I was thinking about fighting for the house, and the very next night, Ryan would come home and say, "Dad says that's not going to happen, Mom." I'd tell Laura about an apartment I was looking at in a specific neighborhood, and Daniel would mock me, saying that area was way out of my league financially. Then the lights came on. Looking back, I should have seen it a mile away. The way Laura's face lit up whenever Daniel walked into her room. The way she laughed just a little too loud at his mediocre jokes. She'd always ask about him first. How's Daniel? His work. Is he happy? He'd been pining for my husband for 25 years. And Daniel, the guy who collects admirers like stamps, knew exactly how to play her. He made her feel special, more important than the other women. He probably promised her a bright future together once the divorce dust settled. He gave her just enough hope to buy her absolute loyalty. My best friend was his spy, 25. Years of friendship sold out for some cheap flirting and empty promises. You should have held out for a higher price, Laura. But the real turning point to sign that my preparations were finally ready came from Ryan. About a month after I'd uncovered the debt scheme and started building my file, Ryan overheard Daniel on a call with his lawyer talking about risk transfer. Panicked, my son went through the books and found Daniel's emails to Sophia. He came to me, and I decided right then, no more secrets. I showed him the proof of the debt trap and my plan for HSS. "I need an ally," I told him, "and a legal owner your father won't suspect." Ryan looked at me and just hugged me. "I'm in, Mom." From that moment, Ryan became my inside man. The whole idea of setting up HSS in Ryan's name as a business internship was a play we ran together. And when Daniel gifted him that Tesla, Ryan sold it immediately for cash to pad our legal war chest, a voluntary move Daniel never saw coming. But the worst part wasn't Daniel or Margaret, or even Laura. The most heartbreaking part was watching what this did to Ryan. My son had to witness it all. The young mistress moving in, his grandmother stuffing his mother's life into trash bags, and the way his father looked at me like I had already vanished. And Daniel never stopped pouring poison into my son's ear. "Your mom is just making things difficult. I just want what's best for everyone. She's the one dragging out the pain. I tried to be fair, but she's not cooperating." Ryan started to drift away. It wasn't exactly anger. It was this heavy, confused silence. He didn't know who to believe. Kay and his father was so damn persuasive with that guiding light dad persona. I watched Ryan's lonely silhouette walk back to his room, and I felt like someone was squeezing my heart with a pair of pliers. I was winning the numbers game, but the cost was his image of his father. That's a pain that cuts deep. But then I'd look at the faint scar on my wrist, the souvenir from the time a drunk Daniel shoved me into a tableland I knew. Mercy now would just be a slow death later. I had to protect my son's future, even if it meant sacrificing the innocence of how he saw his dad. I could lose the house, the money, everything I'd spent 20 years building, but seeing my son look at me like I was the source of all the drama, that was the real gut punch. I was the wound that wouldn't stop bleeding. I went to a lawyer, Nina Castellano. She's 52, has eyes like a razor blade, and zero patience for BS. After reviewing the files, she laid out a scorched earth plan. You built this empire. You're entitled to half of everything. The house, the company, the joint accounts. We fight until the end. I looked at her for a long time and whispered, what if I don't want to fight for any of that? Nina looked at me like I was speaking an alien language. Like I'd just suggested sending Daniel a thank you note and a fruit basket. She thought I'd snap depressed, too weak to stand up for myself. She had no idea. Ryan and I moved into a tiny rental. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, a kitchen the size of my old walk-in pantry. Half the boxes didn't even fit. They were stacked in the corner of Ryan's room like a monument to our family's collapse. Meanwhile, Daniel was posting nonstop photos with Sophia. New chapter, new energy. So blessed, he'd write. Margaret would comment right below. So happy for you, honey. You deserve to be happy. Friends and family were calling me 24/7s, fuming. You need a shark. Take him for every penny. Everyone had advice. Everyone thought they knew what I should do. All they saw was a woman who'd surrendered, a wife who'd let her husband walk all over her. They were all wrong. There's something beautiful about being underestimated. People stop watching you. They get sloppy. They stop guarding their secrets. And that's exactly when you collect everything you need to know. 18 months. That's how long I hugged this secret. That's when I learned the truth about Daniel Hayes and his shiny hollow. Empire, 18 months of holding my breath. 18 months of prep. Every piece of evidence, every digit was lined up in silent folders, just waiting for this exact moment. I'd calculated every single penny of debt Daniel was carrying. While he was bragging, I knew the house was only worth about $850,000. But the mortgages and loans against it totaled $1.1 million. We were $250,000 underwater on a house I thought we owned outright. The company was even worse. The credit lines were maxed out at $200,000. Back taxes, $85K, debt to contractors. $120K. Equipment. Loans. $75K. The corporation Daniel paraded around at every party. The thriving firm was actually drowning in nearly $500,000 of debt. Even those fancy cars in the garage, all leased, huge monthly payments that were about to come due. We owned nothing. The only thing we actually possessed was a mountain of suffocating monthly obligations. I sat in my kitchen at 3 a.m., surrounded by printouts, doing the math. Total debt had crossed $2.2 million. Total liquid assets. Barely $700,000. We were standing on the edge of a financial abyss, with a net negative of $1.5 million. But where did all the money go? I kept digging. For the next few weeks, I traced every single transaction, no matter how small, and the picture that emerged was horrifying. $850,000 lost on risky ventures, Daniel decided on a whim. $250,000 evaporated in failed crypto investments. $120,000 gone to gambling. And $100,000 for a secret apartment I never knew existed. Rented for a woman I'd never met, complete with luxury furniture. Then there were the costs of a double life he never brought home. Designer watches, Brioni suits, and lavish trips. I wasn't invited to. Another $180,000? My husband wasn't building an empire. He was building a house of cards out of borrowed money, and those cards were already on fire. Even worse, I found a draft where Daniel planned to transfer this entire mountain of debt into my name, making me the fall guy when it all collapsed. We looked rich the same way a mannequin looks alive. Convincing from a distance, but completely hollow up close. My first instinct was to confront him, to scream, to cry, and demand answers. But I know Daniel. I've watched him operate for years. If I confronted him, he'd manipulate me. He'd use that silver tongue to gaslight me until I felt like a crazy person for even doubting him. He'd find a way to make it my fault. And worse, if he knew I was onto him, he might come after my personal savings. Instead of a confrontation, I started a more sophisticated play. About 2 months after I found the scheme, I suggested we set up Hayes Support Solutions, HSS, in Ryan's name. I told Daniel it would help our son learn the business and save us on outsourcing costs. Daniel, with his guiding light ego, loved the idea. At first, I drafted the contracts with dirt cheap rates. Do you think we should set the prices below market for Ryan? It's how he feels the heat of real competition? I asked with fake innocence. Daniel nodded, impressed, not giving those small numbers a second thought. But after a few months, once he was in the habit of signing without reading, since it was all in the family, I started drafting new addendums. I slowly bumped the strategic consulting and special oversight fees to 20 to 25% of the net profit on major projects, layering in complex cost-saving percentage clauses. It was all buried in thick stacks of paperwork, priced just enough to be justifiable. Daniel would just skim the titles and sign .to buy Ryan's loyalty and solidify his cool dad status. Daniel gifted him a Tesla Model 3. He whispered to him, "Let your mom handle the books. Women are good at the tedious stuff. I'll teach you the big vision." Ryan, obsessed with the car, started drifting away from me in the following months. As part of my plan to peel away the actual assets from Daniel, I subtly convinced him to transfer the Lake Tahoe vacation house to Ryan. I framed it as a tax move. Let's reduce the tax hit on second properties and let Ryan learn property management. Daniel, obsessed with status and bored with a house that didn't give him enough clout, agreed instantly. "Yeah, that place doesn't have any sentimental value anyway," he blurted out. I noted that. It would be useful later. You see, I always kept something for myself. My grandmother's voice echoed in my head. A woman should always have her own money. I had a private retirement fund from my law firm days. I'd moved it to a separate account when I quit, but I never touched it. By then, it had grown to about $250,000. That was my money, my work, my legal separate property. And then there was the inheritance. My grandmother passed away when I was 28 and left me $450,000. Her will was specific. "This money is for Emily only." I kept it in a separate account for years, never letting it touch Daniel's finances. Combined with my retirement fund, I had $700,000 that was 100% mine. Her advice, "Have something of your own," saved me. Soon as I found the debt scheme, I set up an irrevocable trust for Ryan and moved every cent into it. It became a steel shield for my son's future and something Daniel couldn't touch. Only then did I start gathering the evidence for everything else. I knew Daniel would eventually leave. Men like him always do. They get bored, or they find someone younger, or they just decide they deserve more. I just needed to be in position. When it happened, 18 months of waiting. 18 months of watching him dig his own hole deeper, I became a master of patience. I pretended I didn't know he was dragging us both into a financial swamp. When Daniel finally demanded the divorce at the dinner table and shoved that preliminary agreement at me with total contempt, telling me $50,000 was plenty for a low-level accountant, I had to use every ounce of my soul not to laugh. He didn't even ask for the assets. He just handed me the shovel. He was actually demanding a massive pile of debt. He just didn't know it yet. Back in the present, I sat across from Nina Castellano and dropped 3 thick files on her mahogany desk. 18 months of evidence. Every mortgage document, every loan statement, every secret account. She read in silence for nearly an hour. When she finally looked up, the look in her eyes had shifted. "You've known about this for 18 months? I was waiting for him to leave," I replied calmly. I knew it was coming sooner or later. And when he demanded to take everything, he unknowingly demanded to take all of this debt. He just hasn't connected the dots yet. Nina leaned back. The pity was gone. The worry vanished. Instead, there was something close to awe. So, by signing over all the assets, you're walking away clean. He inherits the mortgages, the business loans, the lease obligations. It all becomes his sole responsibility. Meanwhile, your inheritance and retirement, your separate property, are legally shielded and tucked safely into the trust for your son. She went quiet for a beat, then smiled. A slow, dangerous smile. Mrs. Hayes, she said, I believe I owe you an apology. I know. You thought I'd given up. I smiled back. Everyone did. That's kind of the whole point. Nina went from looking at me like a lost kitten to looking at me like a grandmaster. I like being the grandmaster better. The outfits are cooler. The trap was set. The numbers were verified. The paper trail was airtight. All I had to do now was let Daniel think he was winning. And nobody, absolutely nobody, plays the loser more gracefully than a woman who's been practicing endurance for 20 years. The next 3 months were a masterclass in acting. I became exactly what everyone expected. Broken, defeated, barely. Holding it together. I showed up to mediation with red eyes and trembling hands. I spoke softly, hesitating, like a woman who'd lost all her confidence. I asked for exactly $75,000 in cash and my few personal belongings. I just want enough. To start over, I said at the second mediation session. I don't want to be difficult. I know the company is his life's work. I know the house means everything to him. I don't want to tear this family apart any more than it already is. Ah, whispered, sounding like a woman who was just spent. I proposed the settlement, $75,000 cash, some personal items, and custody of Ryan. That was it. Daniel agreed instantly. Not a second of hesitation. He was probably geared up for a 50-50th split, what any sane lawyer would demand. But instead, I was asking for crumbs. He looked at me across the table with a look that was almost patronizing, like a savior showing mercy to a wounded animal. I deserved an Oscar for that performance, or at least a Golden Globe. I'd been given the role of a lifetime, and the only audience was my cheating, arrogant, soon-to-be bankrupt ex. Every week that passed, Daniel's ego grew an extra floor. He stopped being careful. He stopped pretending to be a good guy. He started telling anyone who'd listen that I didn't even put up a fight. She just quit. He bragged to his golf buddies. I offered a fair deal, and she signed without a single question. Margaret was even worse. She bragged at her book club, her church, her tea parties. Daniel kept everything. That woman didn't get a dime. I always knew she wasn't E-caliber enough for my son. To celebrate his upcoming victory, Daniel treated himself to a new $20,000 Rolex. I knew because I saw the charge on the company account. He was still casually using corporate funds for luxury personal crap, digging his own debt hole even deeper. He wore that watch to the next mediation session, flashing his wrist just to make sure I noticed. But the ultimate slap in the face came at that year's construction industry gala, very event I'd spent years networking for to build Daniel's brand. He brought Sophia, introduced her to hundreds of colleagues loud and proud. This is Sophia, the real inspiration behind all my success. And Sophia, beaming in a red dress, soaked up the praise that belonged to my 20 years of silent devotion. He even took her to the most expensive French restaurant in the city, The Place, where we'd celebrated our 10th anniversary. He posted a photo with the caption, "Life is amazing when you're with the right person." The right person meaning someone who had no clue about the mountain of debt he was sitting on. Meanwhile, Sophia started redecorating my house. She bought new sofas, hung new art. He was letting her burn through money he didn't even have yet. She even repainted my KitchenAid bland, soulless beige, that soft blue I spent 3 weeks choosing 3 weeks of sleepless. Nights testing samples under every light imaginable just to create the most peaceful space was now buried under a layer of cheap, industrial-looking paint that nothing beige perfectly matches her personality and her future once she realizes Daniel is actually flat broke. A fitting choice, really. Laura, my best friend, turned Spike kept calling, pretending to care just to fish for info. During one call, her voice turned fake worried. "Emily, I'm hitting a financial wall. Could I borrow $30,000? I figured you must have some private savings somewhere, right?" She was digging. I knew that question would be reported back to Daniel in minutes. I gave her the perfect, innocent response. Private stash. "Laura, I wish. If I need anything, Daniel gives it to me. I'm completely dependent on him." That intel, Emily is helpless, was fed back to Daniel, making him even more careless. I played my role perfectly. "Are you okay?" She'd ask in that sickly sweet tone. I just want it to be over. I'd answer, letting my voice shake just enough. "I don't have the strength to fight anymore. I'm exhausted." Within hours, Daniel would have that news. I could see him exhaling, completely letting his guard down. "Laura thinks she's playing me, but she's just a free courier service for my messaging." But while the adults were obsessed with their games, Ryan was watching. My son, smart, sharp, and incredible, started noticing the cracks. He saw the $20,000 Rolex on his dad's wrist, but then heard his dad say we were tightening our belts and couldn't fund his business internship trip. He saw Sophia's shopping bags piled at the door while his dad complained about cash flow. He realized the massive gap between the flashy lifestyle his father paraded and the lies he kept spitting out. One night, Reen came to my tiny rental and sat at my old dining table. He looked at me with those serious eyes so much like Daniel's, but containing something Daniel lost long ago: integrity. "Mom," he whispered, "is Dad actually rich?" I looked at my son for a long time and asked, "What do you think?" He thought about it in silence and then said, "I think something's wrong. I think Dad is putting on a show." My 20-year-old son figured it out before 2 lawyers and a CPA did. Should I deduct a consulting fee from his college fund? Behind the scenes, Nina was prepping the legal strategy with surgical precision. The main divorce settlement stated I was waiving all rights to the marital assets. The house, the company. The car's all Daniel's. In exchange, I'd take my modest cash payout and leave. But attached to that agreement was an addendum, detailed disclosure of liabilities. Every debt, every mortgage, every financial obligation tied to those assets. When Daniel signs for the assets, he legally accepts the liabilities too. The mortgages become his sole responsibility. The company debt transfers entirely to his name. The luxury car leases become his problem alone. It was all there in black and white, legal, procedural, and explosive. Legal documents are like poetry, Nina told me. A boring, expensive kind. Of poetry that can ruin a man's life. My favorite genre. 2 weeks before the final court date, Harold Whitfield, Daniel's lawyer, called Nina, sounding concerned. "My client is taking on a massive amount of assets," Harold said cautiously. "I want to request a full financial audit before we sign off, just to verify everything." Nina kept her voice neutral. "Of course, we will provide any documents you need." But when Harold took the suggestion to Daniel, my ex-husband shut it down immediately. "No audit." Daniel snapped. "I built that company. I know exactly what it's worth. I'm not paying some accountant to tell me what I already know by heart." Harold tried to push back. "I strongly advise you to verify the net value before signing. This is crucial." But Daniel cut him off. "Sophia wants this over with." Want it over with? No more delays. Harold had been practicing law for over 30 years. He was sharp enough to smell a fatal mistake, but he also knew he couldn't force a client to listen. He handed Daniel a liability waiver document, stating the lawyer recommended an independent audit and the client refused. Daniel signed it, without even looking. Never underestimate the power of an impatient mistress to make a man ignore the fine print. Sophia was worth millions in my legal strategy. The night before court, Daniel sent me a text. "Thanks for not making this ugly." I stared at that message for a long time. 20 years of marriage, 20 years of building his career, raising our son, managing every microscopic detail of his life. And now he was thanking me for not making it ugly while he kicked me to the curb. I slowly typed back, "I just want. What's best for Ryan?" Exactly. What was best for Ryan was a safe trust, a secured future, and a father about to learn the most expensive lesson of his life. Nina called me that night. 9 a.m. tomorrow. Final hearing. Judge Holden presiding. You ready? I looked around my small rental, the old furniture, the unopened boxes. The kitchen I'd just repainted soft blue, the color of hope. I've been ready for 18 months. Thursday morning, April 17th. Courtroom 4B. I remember every detail. The sunlight streaming through the high windows. Smell of old wood and floor wax. The hushed murmurs of lawyers flipping through files. This was where 20 years of marriage officially ended, and where 18 months of patience finally paid off. Daniel arrived first. He was wearing his priciest Brioni suit, his brand new Rolex flashing on his wrist as he shook Harold's hand. He looked confident, relaxed, like a man about to close the deal of a lifetime. Sophia was waiting in the hallway. She wasn't allowed inside, but wanted to be there for moral support. Through the crack in the door, I saw her scrolling through her phone with a smug grin. My mother-in-law, Margaret, was there too, dressed like she was heading to a gala. Probably with a celebratory lunch reservation already booked. She gave me a look of pure contempt, the smile of someone who thinks they've already won the war. I walked in a few minutes later, simple navy dress, no jewelry, hair tied back. I purposely did my makeup to look tired, drained, like a woman who had zero fight left. Perfect. I should open an acting school after this. Judge Patricia Holden took the bench. She was in her 60s, gray hair, glasses perched on the bridge of her nose. 30 years in family court meant she'd seen every trick, every lie, and every manipulation in the book. Nothing surprised her. She skimmed the file and looked. Up, Hayes versus Hayes. Final decree. I understand the parties have reached an agreement. Harold stood up first. Yes, Your Honor, my client, Mr. Daniel Hayes, will take possession of all marital assets including real estate, Mercer Construction Group, and all associated vehicles. In exchange, Mrs. Emily Hayes will receive a cash payment of $75,000. Nina stood up beside me. Correct, Your Honor. My client agrees to waive all rights to these assets and accepts the settlement terms as stated. Judge Holden looked at me, searching for any sign of coercion. Mrs. Hayes, I need to confirm you understand what you are signing today. You are walking away from a massive amount of equity, the family home, and the company you helped build. Are you sure this is what you want? I kept my voice soft, slightly trembling. Yes, Your Honor, I understand. I just want my husband to have everything he asked for. I want this to be over. The judge went silent for a long moment, probably debating whether to intervene and save me from a seemingly idiotic decision. But I had counsel, I was coherent, and I was an adult. Very well, she said finally. Proceed with the signatures. The court clerk handed out the final documents. Harold Whitfield leaned in, touching Daniel's arm, shifting his glasses with a look of pure dread. Daniel, stop. I'm serious. I strongly advise you to do one last check before you sign this. Daniel brushed him off, his face twisting with irritation. Drop it, Harold. You're overthinking. I've run Mercer Construction for decades. There isn't a single digit in here I don't already know. Just let me sign so I can get out of here and take Sophia to lunch. Daniel grabbed the pen and signed with an aggressive, triumphant flourish on every single page, not even bothering to read a word. He wanted it over. He wanted his freedom and his young mistress. I, on the other hand, signed slowly, deliberately. Every stroke was precise and steady. This was the moment I had lived for, and I wanted to savor every second of this man signing. The death warrant for his own career. Across the room, Daniel caught Margaret's eye and smirked. In his pocket, his phone buzzed incessantly. Sophia, no doubt, sending impatient texts. He actually pulled his phone out to check it in the middle of his own divorce hearing. That's who he is. Meanwhile, Harold, a damn good lawyer, started. His final verification, main contract, signed. Asset list, signed. Payment terms, signed. Then he flipped to the addendum, the disclosure of liabilities. I watched his face as he read. Confusion flickered across his eyes. He flipped back a page, then forward again, as if hoping he'd just misread it. He hadn't. Harold went ghost white. He leaned toward Daniel, his voice a frantic low whisper. "Sir, we need to talk." Right now, Daniel waved him away, still high on his victory. "Not now, Harold. We're almost done, sir." Harold's voice turned desperate. "You are assuming all of the debt." Daniel snapped his head toward him, frowning. "The liability disclosure," Harold whispered, his papers crinkling as he jabbed at the numbers. "The mortgages, the corporate liens, the judgment sits, all here. You are taking personal responsibility for everything." For the first time, Daniel actually looked at what he'd signed. I watched his eyes scan the rows of numbers in the liability disclosure. His face went from flushed red to pasty white, then a sickly gray. He didn't just win the lottery. He just signed for a bill that put him over $1.5 million in the hole. A dead silence swallowed the courtroom. I could hear Margaret's breath hitch behind me. Daniel bolted upright, his chair screeching against the floor. "This isn't right. There's a mistake." He looked at me, then the judge, then back at the pile of papers. "She hid this from me. This is fraud." Judge Holden's voice was like a blade. "Mr. Hayes, sit down. These numbers are fake." Daniel shouted, his voice cracking with panic. "She manipulated the documents. This is Mr. Hayes." The judge's tone left zero room for argument. "Sit down." He collapsed back into his seat, his hands shaking violently. The smug smile was dead. In its place was pure, unadulterated terror. Judge Holden looked at the papers, then back at Daniel. "Mr. Hayes, I am looking at the disclosure of liabilities. Attached to this agreement, these are the debts tied to the assets you specifically requested ownership of. Your name is on the titles, your company, your real estate." She fixed him with a hard stare. "Are you telling this court that you have no knowledge of your own financial situation?" Silence. Watching Daniel try to explain why he didn't know about his own debt was like watching a cat try to explain why there's a broken vase on the floor. Pathetic, unconvincing. Wait. $314,000. Daniel suddenly screamed, his finger trembling as he pointed to the line. Item for HSS. Why did Mercer Construction transfer over $300,000 to Hayes Support Solutions? You've been skimming from me? Asterisk Harold immediately demanded the court order HSS to return the money to the marital estate. That's when Ryan stood up from the back row. My son's voice was steady, calm. Your Honor, I am Ryan Hayes, the sole legal owner of HSS. That payment of $314,750 is the legal compensation for management consulting, special oversight, and logistics optimization that HSS provided to Mercer Construction over the past year. Every contract and addendum carries the clear, authorized signature of Daniel Hayes. Under California law, the assets of an adult child are not part of the parent's marital estate. Daniel looked at his son like he didn't recognize him, his voice choking up. Ryan, ... Since when did you know? Ryan didn't answer. He just turned to me with a look of absolute loyalty. Nina wrapped it up. Mr. Hayes has no legal claim to those funds. Judge Holden shot down Daniel's request. From the gallery, Margaret let out a sharp gasp, her designer bag hitting the floor with a dull thud. Harold cleared his throat, his voice tight. Your Honor, let the record reflect that I strongly urged my client to perform an independent financial audit before today's hearing. He refused. I have the signed documentation to prove it. He presented the liability waiver, the one Daniel had signed, without even glancing at it. The document stated in clear, cold legalese that counsel recommended a full audit, and Daniel had declined. Judge Holden scanned it. So Mr. Hayes was advised to verify these numbers. He chose not to. He signed away that right. She looked directly at Daniel. Is that correct? Daniel stared at the waiver like it was a snake that had just bitten him. I thought. Is that your signature, Mr. Hayes? A long, agonizing silence. Yes. Then you voluntarily accepted this risk. The judge's voice was as flat as a dial tone. You had every opportunity to investigate. You chose to stay blind. The agreement stands. From the gallery behind me, I heard Margaret let out a sharp, choked gasp. I turned around and saw her clutching her designer bag, her face ghostly pale. The woman who never missed a makeup appointment looked like she'd aged 10 years in 10 seconds. She'd planned a victory lunch. Now she was sitting in the ashes of her son's life. Our eyes met for a split second. I didn't smile. I just looked at her with total terrifying calm. It was enough for her to finally understand. The daughter-in-law she'd looked down on for 20 years had just won the war. Daniel spun toward me, desperation exploding out of him. You knew all of this. I looked him dead in the eyes, my voice steady but carrying the weight of a million suppressed emotions. I was your accountant for 11 years, Daniel. I knew about everything, but before that, I was your wife for 20. I knew your early dreams, the fear of failure you hid from everyone, and the man you lost when you let the fake fame blind you. Today, I didn't show you numbers. I showed you the value of what you threw away for a hollow empire. His face cycled through every possible stage of grief, confusion, rage, betrayal, fear. And finally, the one I'd been waiting for, realization. The moment he knew he'd walked into a trap he built himself. I want to withdraw the agreement, Daniel told the judge. I didn't understand what I was signing. This isn't fair. Judge Holden shook her head. Mr. Hayes, you signed these documents before this court, confirming you understood and agreed to every term. You had competent counsel. You waived the audit. Your wife didn't hide a thing. This is your debt, your mortgage, your obligations. She paused, then slammed her gavel. The agreement is final. Court is adjourned. Mrs. Hayes, you have your settlement. Mr. Hayes, you have the assets and every liability attached to them. This marriage is over. I stood up, smoothed my dress, and picked up my bag. I looked at Daniel one last time. He was slumped in his chair, papers scattered in front of him, his entire world turning to dust. You said you wanted everything except Ryan, I said softly. I gave you exactly what you asked for before walking out. I added one last thing, my voice like a breeze. Oh, and the Lake Tahoe house. I'm so glad you voluntarily transferred that to Ryan last month for tax purposes. Since you said it had no sentimental value, I get it now. It really was worthless. To you, Daniel could only sit there, gray-faced and speechless. Every piece of the puzzle had clicked into place with brutal perfection. He looked through the glass doors to the hallway and saw Sophia still standing there. But her face had gone white as she heard the final numbers. She'd heard enough. Her eyes darted away, refusing to make contact, and she turned and hurried away, the click of her high heels on the marble floor sounding frantic and final. I walked out of the courtroom without looking back. In the hallway, I could hear Daniel starting to scream at Harold, threatening to sue. Harold's voice was a calm drone. I told you to audit. I have it in writing. You said no. The end was pathetic. Daniel lost everything. The bank took the house, the company went under, and creditors swarmed like sharks. Just months later, he had to file for personal bankruptcy. Margaret's Christmas update that year was brief. Daniel is pursuing new opportunities. Yeah, new opportunities in debt restructuring. 2 weeks after the court date, Sophia packed her bags in the middle of the night. She left a single note on the counter. This isn't what I signed up for. Her bland, minimalist beige kitchen is now just an empty, hollow shell. About 3 months later, Daniel showed up at my door. I almost didn't recognize him. He was gaunt, with deep dark circles under his eyes and a wrinkled suit that looked like it hadn't seen a dry cleaner in weeks. The $20,000 Rolex. Gone, Emily. I messed up. Please, ... His voice was a dry rasp. I need help. Just a small loan, ... Asterisk, I watched him through the peephole. This is the moment people wait for, the enemy on his knees begging. But I didn't feel smug. I didn't feel angry. Just felt nothing. You asked for everything except Ryan? I said softly through the door. You got exactly what you wanted. Emily. Please, ... Goodbye, Daniel. I didn't open the door. I walked back inside and finished my bowl of mint chocolate chip ice cream. It's the taste of the clarity I'd held on to for 18 months. It's never been sweeter. Laura called me 3 times in the first week. The first time she sobbed, apologizing. The second time she claimed Daniel had manipulated her. The third time she asked if we could ... start over. I didn't answer. You can't buy back 25 years of friendship with 3 voicemails. I don't need her. I've learned that a chosen solitude is infinitely better than being betrayed by a fake friend. Margaret tried to use Ryan as a middleman. Right. My son shut it down. They made their choices, and I have my peace. Ryan, my smart, sharp boy, figured it out on his own. He saw the court filings, heard his father's desperate excuses, and watched Sophia vanish while Margaret scrambled to save face. The golden mask had completely shattered. One evening, he sat with me in our small apartment. The kitchen was that. Hope blue, the old furniture was in place, and the last boxes were finally unpacked. You waited 18 months, he said quietly. You knew everything, and you just stayed silent. I wanted you to be safe, I said, squeezing his hand. Trust is yours. No one can touch it. He stayed quiet for a second, then slid a folder across the wooden table. I cut every remaining contract with Mercer before they declared bankruptcy. HSS is ours now, 100% debt-free. The way he looked at me wasn't out of pity anymore. It was the respect a student has for a master. I learned from the best. Mom. He gave me a hug, a real tight hug, the kind I'd been starving for. With Ryan's trust secured and my $75,000 in cash, I opened a small financial consulting firm. My specialty: helping women reclaim their power and autonomy after their marriages go up in flames. In my new office, with walls painted that same hope blue-eyed picked out once before, I brew tea exactly the way my grandmother taught me. First client was Sandra. She was lost after 28 years of marriage. How do I even start over? She asked. One room at a time, one color at a time, and one day at a time. I smiled. We repainted her kitchen blue. She cried when she saw it. Happy tears, she said, the color of a new beginning. When Sandra asked about the old wooden recipe box on my desk, I told her that's the most important financial map I own. It contains the formula for never having to rely on anyone else's mercy again. I look at Sandra woman like millions of others across the country. After a divorce, women are the ones who usually lose the house, lose the equity, and have to start from zero in a system where the deck is still stacked against them. But I tell her and every woman who walks into this office that they aren't alone. There are support groups. There are sharks like Nina, and there's a whole community rising from the ashes. This box isn't just a relic. It's a torch. My eyes drift toward the window. I can see Ryan out there, confidently running HSS. He wasn't just my ally for those 18 months. He's my partner. We're building a future without ever looking back. This morning, got a photo from Nina. It was Daniel, standing outside a cheap employment office in the suburbs. His Armani shirt was wrinkled and fading. It looked like he'd aged 10 years. I turned off my screen and took a deep breath of the fresh lavender on my desk. Revenge isn't watching your enemy die. It's watching them have to live in the world. They tried to destroy for you while you build a paradise out of the ruins. Numbers never lie. Don't let your innocence become someone else's weapon. Always, always have something of your own. Tonight, after Ryan went to sleep, I sat in my living room and looked at my grandmother's photo on the shelf. "You were right about everything," I whispered. "This apartment is small, but it's mine. Every paint color, every piece of furniture, every decision, it's all mine." The dream I put on hold at 22 build Daniel's empire. I'm building it for myself now, and for the first time in a very long time, I am truly free. The kind of freedom my grandmother taught me, built on wisdom, patience, and the strength of having your own back. If you agree with how I protected Ryan's future, drop a deserved in the comments. If you think I went too far, let me know with too cold. My grandma used to say, "A candle loses nothing by lighting another candle." I lit mine from the ashes, and I want to help you do the same. Hit subscribe to join our family where we turn pain into power. Your subscription is you saying, "I choose me." Share this with a friend who needs a wake-up call. And tell me, between revenge and forgiveness, where do you draw your line?